So I think relationship, although I know it's an odd thing to say for a father and a child relationship, I think sometimes we miss it because we can get bombarded with so many things going on in our lives. It's busy with work. Everything's going expensive, so parents have to work harder. So I think it's even more important now that we keep tab on the relationship that we have with our kids.
Because a figure is a bit like a figurine, a kind of iconic plastic, plasterine, ceramic, static. But the father presence is a person whose movement, whose feeling, whose smell is there with you. We're very used to seeing images of mum or dad at the door when the baby's trying to go to sleep, and then they look and they coo and they turn the light out and they go out. For me, one of the most beautiful memories with the children is changing their nappies. Because when you're changing a nappy, there is mess one side and delight the other side. And it's one of the few occasions where a child and a father, child and a mother, but a child and a father are eyeball to eyeball in a very, very fixed and focused way. And it can be literally bringing delight to the child. So those basic duties are presence. It's presence. It's not a static thing, it's a moving thing. And as the years go by and the children grow, the need to be permanently present, to go with, even to go with to things you don't like, whether it's events or parties or music, occasions or sights, you just go with and come back without criticism and undue comment, but just to enjoy the fact that that's what they enjoy. And presence means you stay with.
So that just tells me, the role of a dad is not just, the day-to-day stuff, but there's the wisdom that comes from time, So there's a saying in Africa that says, what an old man can look at sitting down, a young man standing will not see. And so there's years of experience that fathers have picked up, and with a good father figure, that experience can be passed on without having to go through that process yourself.
I got sent away to boarding school at the age of 14 from Jamaica to England. And that's a very long way, a bit like Nigeria to here, but slightly further. And the person who became a remarkable father to me at boarding school was the headmaster. And it helped that he owned the school, so he would always be there on every alternative weekend. And by the age of 15, he'd understood that I had made a clear faith commitment to follow Jesus. So he offered me the opportunity to do Bible study with him. And I found that remarkable, that this wonderful older man in his mid-60s, who was very tall and prosperous and quite stern, we would sit together in his office, across his table, and read the Bible on a Saturday evening. And that went on from the age of 15 right the way through to 18. And I treasured it. It was really important. It helped me to learn. I felt he was a mature figure, father, presence, being with me. And then when my father died at the age of 16 in a car crash in Jamaica, he became hugely emotionally supportive to my brother and I, and was very engaged in helping us with the process of going back for the funeral, coming back, sitting down, expressing what we felt, and then just taking us forward. And so somebody who chooses to opt into your life, it may have no either cultural or biological or other connected reason to be there, but chooses to be a father to you. I love that experience, which happened to me, and I choose to do that for others.
Because I know for myself, when I was a dad to my first foster daughter, she came from a whole line of not really having these people in her life, and she didn't really know what maybe a good dad was, or she couldn't navigate kind of good masculinity, and so she landed up with me and with my family, and over a few years, for her it was a very defining kind of part of her story, and I say that because she's told me. but actually that thing of me as a protector, you know, me as someone who would give her wisdom and advice and, you know, just try and do the best, say sorry, stuff like that.
For me, it's definitely wasn't intentionally understood or learned, but when I look back, those experiences of having essentially an absent father, or a father that was present but not necessarily there, kind of did shape my view of God. So my dad was, you know, that classical guy that would probably only talk to you if you were in trouble, or was quite very authoritative, and quite abusive to my mom and to us. And so, yeah, so that it shaped my view of God as quite a, you know, strong, disciplinarian, like scary person, you know, that you didn't really engage with and was looking down at you and just waiting for you to trip up. And it wasn't until I met, you know, Lord Hastings, Leroy Hogg, some other people through my local church that took me up. And then I started to really understand the grace of God, the elaborate, crazy love of God, the God that walks with you gently and patiently, the God that is present, you know. And I guess through that I've understood him as father and not dictator. And that's really helped me.
You know, I grew up in Sri Lanka, and then we came over here in '92 when the civil war started to get a little bit too intense. So my parents packed bags. I came back from school, and our bags were ready in our house, and said, "Oh, we're going on a trip." And the next thing I know,
Wow.
I'm in England. And, you know, growing up, my dad was in the Navy. So he kind of had to, you know, drop all that and go with us for our safety and things like that. But my dad was he loved us, but I think maybe it was a culture. You just don't show, you know, I don't remember my dad hugging me. I don't remember my dad saying, "I love you," or having those deep conversations. None of that kind of happened in my upbringing. So it's kind of something that we just knew. We respect our father, we do as he says, and our mum was the one that kind of veered us and, you know, grew us because he was away in the Navy and things like that. So when I became a dad, it taught me how God is, because I didn't really get that growing up. And plus, Christians, my mum was a Hindu, my dad was a Buddhist. So when my mum gave her life to God, came into church, and I kind of started understanding who God is. But I think I got deeper revelation of who God is when I actually did become a dad, and how patient he is with you. You know, so all those little things that you kind of don't pick up when you're growing up because of your dynamics in the house when you were growing up. I think learned more about God as a father, me being a dad, rather than me growing up in a house that had a dad.
We had two children through birth, two daughters, and then my wife suggested at some point, I'd like to foster, and I thought, what? You know, this came, you know, this wasn't on my radar. I'd never thought about this before, and I thought, okay, I'll support you in it, you know, which is a ridiculous thing to say, because once you have that child in your house, you can't just support, can you? So anyway, a brother and sister came to us, and the brother was he was almost a year old, and the little girl was 3 weeks old, and she wasn't very well. So there were lots of trips back and forth to the hospital. And this one particular week, my wife was just exhausted and she wasn't well. She said, "She's not well again, you're gonna have to take her up to the hospital." The Ryder Cup. So the Ryder Cup was on. My brother had these tickets for the 4 days. And he said, "I can't go on the Saturday, do you want the ticket?" I said, yeah, I'd love the ticket. So anyway, Friday comes and I'm in the hospital and I'm saying to the doctors and nurses, "Do you think she's going to be better like tomorrow? When do you think she's going to get better?" is it going to be okay for me to go tomorrow? Anyway, Saturday morning comes, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 1 o'clock, I realized, you're not going. You're not going to this once in a lifetime thing. But it was at that point where I believe, I'm convinced this was God. This little girl is far more important than a bunch of men with some sticks. She is far more important than all of these things. And that flipped a switch in my mind to really be, I don't know, to have this heart for the vulnerable children. And because I then began to learn, the more I got into understanding about this, that many children were afraid to go home for whatever reason. And I never had that. I was always welcome back home. The heart of God, that I love this little girl and I love these vulnerable children, and I want you to look after them.
My dad was quite open to having people in his home. It didn't matter whether they had their fathers or mothers. He would take them in, and they would, if no one told you they were not his children, you would not believe, because whatever he did for me, he did for them. There was no demarcation. So growing up in that environment has also helped to shape my own perspective that you don't have to be related by blood. And so when you see other children who are in need, I look back and see my own upbringing, and so back home we don't have this formal adoption. You don't go through the process. You just take the child in, and the child comes. And that's it. But so here we had the challenge of, okay, do we want to go through this formal process because of what God has in store for them, and your willingness to navigate them through their own journey? They turn out to be a huge blessing to you and to the society at large. So if you ever find yourself in such a situation, don't be discouraged, go for it and adopt, foster.
I've had the delight of having 3 adopted children, all of whom are grown up now, but one's still at home, but never mind. Like I said earlier, the children are always the children, no matter how old they are. And if they get married, as one of them has done, and they have their own children, they're still the children, and you'll talk about them and feel them that way. But then I've also had the joy of over 200 young men who choose to treat me as a father, and so one of them being Seth, and we work together in a family context where everything's open and on the table, and the relationships are very precious.
I'm very wrapped up a lot of the time in my own world, so I find that quite tricky. Somebody else comes in and disturbs that world. But for me, I think I've learned more and more and more about this thing of giving myself. I fail very often, but more and more about, this isn't about me. This is about what God wants me to do with these children. Even if I'm not always acting on it, I'm always thinking, this isn't about you. This isn't about you. This is about serving them. And that's what Jesus came to do.
I also think, having gone through the formal process, I've had quite a few fathers, come and ask, what's this whole journey like? Yeah. And so that tells me we do have some fathers who are interested, probably just don't know who to speak to. And so I think it's important for those of us who have taken that first step to become a bit more vocal in sharing our experiences. Not masking, don't try and make it look all nice and rosy. There are challenges that come with the territory. It just reminds you about the innocence, the beauty of just seeing the children enjoying themselves with a dad present and watching, even though you'd rather be watching something else, but you're stuck there and trying to enjoy it, basically. And I think if we are able to voice that a bit more, because some parents, they say some dads are still children at heart. That child within us can still go out to nurture another child and help them to navigate their way through. And we want to reduce a lot of the challenges we have, then we need to jump in there and start to help some of these children navigate their way through life.
That here is an opportunity, whether birth child or an adopted child, a fostered child. They are a child given to you to intriguingly treasure, irrespective of the source. And that's exactly the same as God's acceptance of us as sons and daughters into the life of Christ, irrespective of circumstance and background and lifestyle and activity.
I said to her, what's the one thing that you really value with me, or one experience that you've had with me throughout your entire life that you really put like front and centre? Now, I've paid for holidays over the years, she's done football, she's done this, that and the other. You know, I put my hand in my pocket at various points, right? And actually she said, do you remember when we made cheese and bacon rolls last Christmas? I said, what? She said, yeah, that's the one thing that I can really remember. I remember making these little things, we baked them together, we served them up to friends and family. There was part of me that was furious, right? Because I had paid all this money. But actually, it was in that simplicity that she said, that's the thing that I most value in my relationship with you, or that's that one thing that I remember doing with you that really sticks out.
And initially I said, one, please, let's start with one. And my wife was like, we have room for, I was like, one, let's start with one, please, you know. But then they said there were two. And she said, there are two, we can't separate them. I said, I know we can't separate them. Do we have to take two? And she was like, yes. So I said, okay, just give me time to get my head around it, because you know you've got two toddlers, but then God gives you that ability. When you're stretched, when you're burnt out, you go back and say, God, I need your help. You know, it's good to be real. I need your help. You know, and he does give you that love and that empathy.
Well, a bit younger and they're passionate about vulnerable children, just to keep talking about it, you know, keep the conversation going. The more we talk about this stuff, the more we normalize this stuff, and the more we normalize this stuff, the more that we're able to turn the tide, because there are thousands of kids waiting for adoption and fostering right now. And like you said, we just don't talk about it enough.
If your wife is pushing it, then go along with it. Go along with it. You know, sometimes it just occurred to me. Sometimes God will take us places where we don't want to go. But when we go, there is you will look back and you will look to where you are now and see the great blessing. So I was taken to a place where I didn't want to go. I didn't want to foster. I didn't want to adopt. But now I've become super passionate about it, and I love. Family life is hard sometimes, but I love. I just love what God, the heart that God has given me, because it's not my own heart to do this. So yeah.
Don't forget how important it is to bring good masculinity to kids, and actually what you might feel like you're not equipped to do it. You might feel like your wife is further ahead in the process, like you were saying. You might feel like, oh, what am I going to bring to that kid's life? You know what I mean? Do not underestimate the profound effect that you can have on a young person's life through being a good dad, you know, and being a good father figure, because I think we would all testify to the fact that, you know, that it's been because of good men who did it for us. We want to do that for others. And so don't ever belittle what you can bring to the table, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think for me, that's probably one of the important things, you know, being around this conversation and actually working in the front line with kids, you know, that need actually good homes, and they might not have good homes. Don't be afraid. To be honest with you, I think that's probably one of my first kind of thoughts when I think about it. But, you know, having been here and hearing your stories is something that's probably churning in my head to have a conversation about, maybe down the line. But that's only because we just had the conversation, and the impact that you guys have had and they've had on your lives is a massive thing. So yeah, like having that conversation massively helps. And, you know, men, like you said, that other men have talked to you about it because they've seen you do it, is a massive thing. So yeah, just keep talking about it and be open. And I guess don't be afraid, even with the complexity. It makes me think that next part of the journey maybe even for us. So my wife watching this, so she's good. What are you talking about? But let's see.